Few things are for sure in this life, but this is. If we live for any substantial amount of time, we will encounter grief due to the loss of a loved one. Not something any of us ever want, and we all handle it differently. This podcast is to feature those who have done purposeful and meaningful things through their grief. These people featured on here are normal folks, just like you and me, who were thrust into a place they never wanted to be in their lives. A painful place. As they moved through their pain, they realized that something worthwhile, something for the greater good, could come out of the unthinkable. I'm sure that none of them would ever consider themselves to be a hero, but when I searched the definition of the word hero, I found this: a person who is admired or idolized for courage, outstanding achievements, or noble qualities. And that fit. And so it's my privilege to bring you the remarkable stories of these heroes in grief. Hi, everyone. This is Tom, your host for the Heroes in Grief podcast, and the response has been incredible so far, and I want to thank you for that. It's getting out to people, and they're letting us know that it's helping them, and that is what it's all about. I want to make you aware of a way that you can support this podcast without having to spend 1 cent, and that is through affiliate marketing. I've set up affiliate marketing for online shopping. If you do online shopping, then I have links to all the major retailers, most of them anyways, and I can provide them for you so that when you buy online through those links, you'll help support the podcast through the percentages that we get. It doesn't cost you anything more. You just shop like you regularly would on the sites that you love. It's very easy. All you have to do is shop. And that's it. Just let me know the links to the places that you want to shop at, and I will provide the affiliate links so that you can do it. If you want more information on this, you can go to heroesingrief.com. It takes you to the Linktree page where a video explains it in a little more detail. But you can always email me at tom@heroesingrief.com, and I can answer questions for you. But you can support the podcast that way, and it's very easy, very simple, and it doesn't cost you a cent. Isn't that great? Thank you. Now here's today's episode. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Heroes in Grief today. Thank you so much for tuning in as usual. And you can always find us on YouTube as well if you're just listening out there. And if I could just ask you, when you're on the sites or whatever, to like it, subscribe, whatever the process is, wherever you're finding us, it helps out the podcast for sure to get out to more people. And that's what my biggest desire is, of course. So please do that. And there's links to everything in the show notes all the time and everything. But just share it along so people can find out about it, okay? So anyways, we're going to get right to the podcast today. And today I have Graham Maxey with me. Graham he has a master's in behavioral science and also a master's in divinity. And he is the clinical director for the Center for Grief and Traumatic Loss. And he trains therapists in what's called induced after-death communication. So we're going to get into that, and he's going to tell us all about that. Graham, thank you so much for coming on Heroes in Grief today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm glad to share with you. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say all the way from Texas. That's all.
Yeah. Well,
so how did you get into this work, as we're going to talk about induced after-death communication, but what other background, did something draw you into the grief and loss world? Or was there a story behind that?
Well, actually, I've been, doing grief work with people one way or another since 1974, when I became a pastoral minister. And, people pass away and they expect, to be comforted. They expect to be facilitated in their grief by somebody who's there to listen. And that, was my introduction to it. Later on, I decided that, I like doing counseling better than and actually being a minister ends up being kind of like being the CEO of some organization. And, I like this aspect of it better. So I went back, got more counseling, education, and started working in that field. And what I noticed really quite early was that there was a lot of people who had a lot of problems that were due to relationships they had early in life with people who couldn't be contacted anymore. And when I met my present wife sometime later, we've been married now for 35 years, but on our first, on our third date, actually, I brought a book over to her house and that I thought she would be interested in. And she picked up the book and then winced and said, "This isn't your book." She grabbed her temple, and I said, "Well, it was given to me by a friend." And said, "Well, was your friend left-handed?" "Yes." "Did he shoot himself in the head?" "Yes, he did." "Was his name Don?" "Yes." "Was he married to Barbara?" "Yes, he was." And this was 10 years later. And she says, "Well, Don's here, and he says that he left a note that Barbara never found, and he wants you to call her and tell her where to find it." And later on, I did, and she did. And I got to tell you, Tom, in that 30 seconds of conversation with this lady, who's now my wife, um, the world kind of has a different perspective. And
Yeah.
later on, she was doing um, a presentation, and she invited um, Dr. Jan Holden, who was the um, uh, she ran the clinical counseling department at the University of North Texas. And Jan showed up very graciously and told her about Dr. Botkin's new method, in which was he was calling induced after-death communication therapy. And Shannon came home, told me about it, and I heard about it through her. And she said, "Graham, I think you need to go to Chicago." And after what she told me, I said, "Well, I think you're right." So I contacted Dr. Botkin, read his book, which is still available, and it's called Induced After-Death Communication Therapy, or Induced After-Death Communication, a Miraculous Therapy for Grief and Loss. And I read it, and it's all about his discovery of the method, which he which he found in his work for 20 years at the Veterans Administration in Chicago, working with Vietnam veterans, and just making some small adjustments to an already established method called eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. He inadvertently discovered that people were having real-time contact with loved ones or people who were really important to her. These were all combat veterans, and they were, they had lots of history losing people over there. But
Yeah, EMDR, right, is they currently call it for traumatic loss and things.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
really advanced the whole therapeutic milieu of working with trauma, particularly. And of course, grief and loss is pretty traumatic. I think it's, you look at a stress evaluation scale that has been around for a long time. Losing a loved one is really at the top of the scale, stress. But anyway, in going to see Dr. Botkin and training with him in the method, he said, bring somebody with you and I will demonstrate how this works, not just tell you about it, but I'll demonstrate it. And I couldn't convince anybody to spend the money to fly to Chicago with me. So I had to be my own subject. And excuse me, this was 2006, and back in 1990, Star Wars Episode 1 came out. And I don't know if you remember that unfortunate film, but
I did see that one. I didn't watch many others, but
watching that movie, I noticed that I was just completely mesmerized every time Natalie Portman was on the screen. And after a while, I started thinking, are you really a dirty old man now? This is just, young woman, barely, I think she was like 17 at the time or something. And as I walked out of the theater, it suddenly hit me like a bullet that she was the age that my daughter would have been if she had been born. And, 17 years earlier, my first wife became pregnant again, and she had gestational diabetes. And even though she was very versed in dealing with, she was an RN and very versed in dealing with diabetes, we could not control her blood sugar. And she was, in the ER 3 times in the first 3 months of the pregnancy. And this was looking pretty grim. And she and her doctor determined that, they really could not predict how this was going to go. So we lost the pregnancy at that point. And in the excitement that, my wife was not going to be brain dead or worse, and that I wasn't going to have to raise my son as a single parent, and try to make up for the loss of his mother. I really forgot that, I lost a daughter. There was just too much relief to even think about that. But when I walked out of that movie, I suddenly realized that, there was a part of me that was missing, a part of me that was not going to get to hear her voice or hold her or play with her or any of the things that, dads would do. And so that's the grief that I brought to Chicago with me. And when Dr. Bakken, performed this procedure with me, I actually felt her and saw her in my mind, not as an infant, but as a 23-year-old woman, which would have been her age at that time. And, I got to communicate with her. And I told her, I love you. I'm sorry. And I heard her say, I love you too. And you did the best you knew how to do at the time. And then, Tom, what really cemented it was I felt her hug me from behind. She was standing behind me, and I felt arms around my shoulders. And I happened to think right at that moment, I thought, if I was making this up, I would have done it differently. I would have stood there and held her face to face instead of having her behind me. But that's the way it occurred, And the real kicker is that when I got through with the training and went back to my hotel room, we had an extended conversation there, she and I, and it's like I tell people that I do the work with, that once you know how to get there, you know how to get there. You don't have to come back here to the office. This is something that's within you. You have the knowledge, you have the ability to have that conversation. And it's not something that's actually there's a place in Botkin's book that's really interesting, and the whole book is really fascinating, but there's one anecdote he's talking about where he has a connection with his client. The client has a connection with his brother, I believe, and it seems to be going really, really well. And Alan asks him, he said, well, do you mind if I ask him a question? And the client says, sure. And he says, ask him how he feels about IADC, Induced After-Death Communication. And they do another set of bilateral stimulation. And the client opens his eyes and says, well, my brother says it's fine, but just remember, we're in charge of it, not you. And that's a real relief, because I don't know how to do this,
Yeah.
But what we're really doing in IADC is processing the emotion of loss and abandonment and fear that comes with losing somebody that has helped you define yourself for so many years. You are a father, you are a wife, you are, that becomes who you are. And when you lose that, you lose, contact with yourself, basically. And there's fear in that, and there's all this adrenaline that's being pumped into your body because of that fear and pain, which really does not help you think. We know through functional MRI studies that when you put adrenaline into somebody's body, your body starts shunting blood away from your prefrontal cortex, which is where you do all your rational evaluation and observation. And, adrenaline says to your body, get ready. You need to hide, run away, or fight. You don't need to think about anything. And when your trauma is encoded into your memory differently than any other memory, it goes right from the emotional centers, the amygdala, right into your hippocampus. Kind of bypasses the whole thought process, so that when something re-triggers, an association re-triggers that event, you go right back to the memory, which is fear, pain, absolute abandonment, and so here it is again. And it is cut off in your memory from this longer timeline that you have been, the story of your life that you've been, working on since you had a memory, a biographical memory. And so this happened and this happened, and then it went to that. And trauma is just kind of its own little island of awfulness that's kind of cut off from the rest of that story. And what this procedure really does is let you continue with the memory without the emotional, baggage to it. It's kind of the difference between being in a car wreck and watching a car wreck. They're both kind of they're not fun, but if you're in it, you're having a lot of you're having a lot of problems. But if you see it,
Mm-hmm.
you can observe it, evaluate it, look at it from the outside, which is actually what grief does. And it, normal grief is about the process of turning feelings into facts. This did happen, and I take it with me. So, my analogy is that what we're doing in IADC therapy is kind of like, Tom, it's, almost, well, it is noon where you are, but, if I said, you know where the North Star is, Tom, why don't you go outside and look at it? Well, there's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
The sun's out, this big, glaring incandescent, it blocks out everything else. And what we're actually doing in IDC is letting the sun go down so that you can see whatever else is there. And that's it's a remarkably efficient and effective method. It's the best thing I've ever found, and I have not been tempted to use any other method for helping people grieve since I learned it, 20 years ago. It's just that great.
I have it's bringing up a lot of questions. I'm familiar with EMDR. I have not had the procedure. I don't know how much you know of my background or remember, but my 27-year-old son passed away on February 23rd of 23. And I found him. He lived in our house here, and I found him that morning. So there is a traumatic event for sure. I don't know. I will say I don't know because I don't think it's really affected me adversely moving forward here. I know that it comes up and it's there, and I have my ways of dealing with it. I meditate. I'm into mindfulness. I believe in the afterlife very strongly, and so I don't fear that at all. And so all of those things come into play, although I'm part of Helping Fathers Heal, the Helping Parents Heal offshoot group, and many of the fathers have gone through EMDR and said it was effective for some of them not. And I did know that it was the same for those in combat for PTSD and everything. Is it always done as EMDR, or is it something different, or is it something that occurs through EMDR, or does it always occur through EMDR, or all those things? What's the distinction between them?
Well,
Or is there one?
is that EMDR has become a very precise protocol, and to be EMDR, you have to have all these 8 elements of the procedure. And IADC, first of all, says we're not going to do any cognitive work. We're not going to do anything about beliefs. We're not going to do anything about meta work. We're not going to think about the procedure or about the event or what it means to me right now. We're only going to concentrate on the emotion of it, and we're only going to target the very pinnacle of the pain. We're going to look for, that actually that's the first thing we do is have the client tell the story of who this person was and who they were to them. And in that process, I'm observing them, noting how their reaction is to certain parts of the story. EMDR kind of goes from their starting point is from the symptom, whatever it is, and then they kind of look for the associated parts of that. Very effective in doing that. You can, when I learned EMDR, I was in a practice session with some of the other trainees. Most of them had probably, just graduated and had, I doubt if they'd even seen a client before. And I was going, yeah, I'm kind of skeptical about this, how this is going to work. Well, I got the chance to be the quote unquote client in that situation. And within 3 or 4 sets of the bilateral simulation, I had the answer to a question that I had taken with me for a long time. I had an incident in a grocery store late at night where 2 guys started fighting right in front of me at the checkout line, and they're grappling with each other and coming close to me, and somehow, for some reason, I reached in and grabbed one of them and slung him off his feet away from the other guy. And fortunately, the store manager tackled the other guy and the fight was over. But as I'm walking out, I'm going, what's wrong with you? Why did you do that? This is Texas. People have guns here.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't have any answer to that and for myself. But in that first, EMDR session, within 4 sets, suddenly I'm not sitting in the ballroom with these other people. I'm back in a garden shed, or in front of a garden shed and I'm 3 years old. And I'm watching my 2 5-year-old playmates have this fight in front of me, just suddenly turn and fight each other. But it was a ruse. They were not doing it on purpose. They were doing it to distract me because they thought it would be funny to push me into the shed and lock the door, which they did in unison.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly, even though I'm in Chicago in a ballroom, I'm smelling the inside of this garden shed that I was in when I was 3 years old, and in San Diego, California. And I can smell the earth. I can smell the insecticides that are kept in there. I can smell, everything. And I can feel the panic that I had at 3 years old. It's dark. And I know that there are black widow spiders in there because we had just lost a cat to a black widow spider bite. And, this complete panic that came over me, sitting in Chicago in a ballroom, was just amazing. And suddenly, the connection was there. Okay, this is why when people fight in front of you, it's not just about, oh, that's bad. It's, life-threatening to my nervous system because it had that earlier experience. But, in IADC therapy, what we're looking for is we're going to do the worst first. We're going to look at the epitome of those experiences that you had, and that's where we're going to start. Because what we found is that what Bachman found was that once you do that most difficult part, the rest of the awfulness kind of collapses underneath it. Once that's processed, and the process itself is, like I said, we're turning feelings into facts, because somehow or another the bilateral stimulation, which can be done any number of ways, eye movements or tapping, which is kind of what I prefer, engages another part of your brain, but you're also staring down the awfulness, which, a developed ego functional ego is really there to try to keep you from being in pain as much as possible. It says, if there's something painful, don't go there, which a lot of people, refuse to do, especially men,
Mm-hmm.
because we've been told since we were how old, that if something hurts, big boys won't cry, and, later on just get up, rub some dirt on it and walk it off, uh,
Yeah.
you sure don't want to tell people that something is painful. You sure don't want to cry. God forbid you should cry, because then they cancel your man card, if you
Yeah.
cry. Um,
Hello, friends. I just wanted to take a brief break here in the podcast to make you aware of a very exciting partnership that Heroes in Grief has just formed, and that is with Get Griefy Magazine. I'm going to let their founder and editor-in-chief, Kara Sanchez, tell you all about it.
Hey, Heroes in Grief listeners. Life after loss isn't easy, but it can be colorful and full of possibilities. Meet Get Griefy Magazine, a vibrant resource filled with inspiring stories of life after loss, expert advice, and voices from everyday grievers and thought leaders. Together, they're here to help guide you toward the side of life that's left to be lived fully and authentically. Dive into Get Griefy for free on issue or snag a print copy on Amazon. Connect with us on Instagram at Get Griefy Magazine or visit getgriefymagazine.com to explore, join our thriving small business collective, or discover advertising opportunities. Let's embrace life after loss, boldly and together.
And now back to our episode. So let me ask you, so you mentioned go to that initial place. In my example of finding my son, what is that initial place for me? I'm just trying to paint the picture for somebody if they were to want to go through this process.
Yeah. I had a client. She got word from her ex-husband that her daughter had been murdered by some friends who stole her iPad back when iPads were, really not very common and were absolutely hugely expensive. And in listening to that story, I was expecting that news would be the epitome of the pain she was feeling. But in kind of tracking it down with her, it turned out that what was really the highest level of distress for her in recounting that whole episode was sitting on the other side of a curtain, waiting to identify her daughter's body in the hospital.
Yeah.
And it wasn't actually seeing the body, it was anticipating seeing the body. And that's it wasn't intuitive for me, but it it may have not been for her until she went back and looked at it. But that was you know it's and people forget, actually, until they start telling the story, where is the most intense awfulness to this thing.
Yeah.
And
so it's discovered as you get into it, really, what that
sure,
is,
yeah,
even though people would think, or I may think myself, what is the worst
oh
for
yeah.
me? It may not be evident to me for some reason.
And I'm sitting there observing them, watching, because your body's telling the story too, not just your brain, not just your words. Um, when you get to a certain part that's really tough, um, you tense up, and of course, tears may give it away, but your breathing gets shallow. You're you're reacting to the story as you're telling it, and so I'm observing, and when they get through with the story, I check with them and say, what do you feel like was the most important, most difficult part? And then I check that against, my observation. And we don't get started until we agree on the starting place. That's the first part of it,
How does it then progress into I imagine you're probably going there, to the after-death communication part? You have to
well,
resolve that early part first, of course, to make it open up,
yeah,
make it clear for that to happen, right?
yes, we actually, my analogy is, yeah, there's a magic bullet, but you have to know where to aim it. And that's kind of what the first part is all about. And that may take, the major part of the first session. But what we found is that 2 90-minute sessions really get us where we want to go. And that's kind of unheard of.
Yeah.
But what usually happens is that when we identify that spot and we've done it accurately, sometimes it may not be accurate. And the bilateral stimulation will uncover it pretty quickly. If we're in the wrong spot, you kind of know that early on, because the juice just doesn't flow. You're not like I tell people, there's 3 things that can happen when we do the bilateral stimulation. One, that pain will intensify, which it actually usually does at first. If we ask them, and I do, to rate the distress that they're in, thinking about this moment, like 1 to 10, a lot of times it'll be 9 or a 10. And then after the first set, that they're really looking at that part as they do the bilateral stimulation. He said, well, now it's an 11, it's really more intense. But yeah, it can go up, it goes down, or something else comes up. And that's the important part, is that their job is to pay attention to anything that comes into their mind while we're doing the set. And that's kind of tricky. How do you tell some, unless you are practiced at, mindfulness, or, you're an experienced meditator, being that open is kind of a new experience for a lot of people. And sometimes it takes a little bit of time to get the knack of that. But what happens within, the first 10 minutes, I'll say, of doing the bilateral stimulation is it does come down, and it keeps going down. And, with each successive set, which is probably, 10, 15 seconds at a whack, it keeps coming down. And when it gets, somewhere around 2 or 3 on that scale, what I do is ask people, all right, now that you were experiencing that much relief, let's do this next set while you're just noticing what it's like to be there. That's what you're going to concentrate on, is how is it to be at this level of relief. And at that point, it is quite common for people to suddenly have an experience of the person that they're grieving, just spontaneously. Well, it's all spontaneous. There's no, man, I don't have a Harry Potter wand. I can't do anything that makes this happen. Never really liked the word induced in this process, because I'm not inducing it. I'm actually facilitating something that you're doing, not somebody doing it to you. But at that level, the sun has gone down, and you can see this subtle stuff that you were not able to see with all that pain. And, the good news for me is, I think overall we've done, studies with all the IDC therapists that we could round up. And, the average is about 70-75% of people will have an after-death communication at that point. But the good news is that even the people that don't have one walk out of the office with their pain so reduced that they're able to, really function again totally instead of just partially. That they're not sitting on that sadness and trying to keep it locked down and trying to, which is kind of like trying to balance on a beach ball in the water. Yeah, you can do it, but it takes a lot of energy, which you need to do the rest of your life, And
do those who maybe don't experience it want to and want to come back and try again? That type of thing.
Well, I've actually had people that went through the 2 sessions. They didn't report having an IADC, but my homework to them is to go home and do an active journaling at a specific time every day, and kind of notice what they're feeling, what they're thinking, what's been happening to them. And one lady said, well, I emailed her after our 2 sessions, and actually she emailed me and said, I was doing the homework that you gave me, and I'm sitting there writing, and I looked up in the doorway, and there's my husband smiling at me.
Nice.
Okay, you're late, but we'll forgive you, and one.
How is this? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, the other side of that, I had a guy call me for IADC, and he was missing his wife for sure. And we made a date, and he called me back the next week, and he said, I don't think I need to come in. And I said, why is that? And he said, well, I just, after I talked to you, I went downstairs, and I was in the kitchen, and my wife appeared to me in the full body apparition right by the refrigerator, and she smiled at me. And then so I don't think you can do any more for me than that. And I said, well, maybe not.
Wow. Yeah. Is this done only in person, or do you do it virtually as well?
COVID has opened up the whole new realm, for counseling in general, but for IADC, I've been using it. Other people have been using it remotely. And the only difference is that when we do tapping, they're doing self-tapping, like this. And instead of putting their hands on their knees and me tapping the backs of their hands, that's really been the only difference. But yeah, I just recorded a session last week with a lady doing that. And it was just as effective as anything I've done in my office before, Tom.
What, I know that you said that about 75% have the experience, the after-death communication. What would you consider, or is there stats on what is the success rate of what you're doing?
It is very robust results, that they are long lasting. That if there is another, episode of intense grief, it's usually related to another loss. It's usually, I see losses as kind of like putting beads on a string, and when you put one on there, the whole string vibrates. So the ones that you may have forgotten about will start being active again. It's not like they're separate. They're all connected in our emotional pain centers, basically. And but no, I've never contacted anybody and said, yeah, that lasted for about 6 weeks, and then I got over it. You know.
Mm-hmm.
Now there is a, you know, what we noticed is that this is most effective after people go through the shock and try to actually wire the fact of the loss into their nervous system, because it takes a while. You know, you may know the facts, but it doesn't register emotionally. You're looking for them to come back to the door. You're looking for them to be on the phone when it rings. You're anticipating, you know, seeing them again because you're practiced at that. So we've kind of found that the most effective time generally is after 6 months. But that you know, there's variables in that.
Yeah, the acute grief phase can last for quite a time. But I could totally understand initially you're not even functioning, so it doesn't make any sense to try and attempt anything at that point. That's for sure. So where can people go if they want to look into possibly having this done?
Well, we have a website that has you know, geographical breakdowns of IADC therapists. Actually, you know, extends to Europe and I believe Australia, where we have therapists, and so you can look them up, you know, in places where you are. The website is www.inducedadc.com, and you know, you can look it up by regions, and then that'll break down by states. And of course, you have to be in the state. You don't have to live there. You just have to be in the state where this therapist is licensed, and that's how they're broken down, is by states and by regions. So you can look one up and find out, you know, if they do remote therapy, or, you know, internet kinds of connections, or you have to be there in person or something. But it is, you know, I'm licensed in Pennsylvania and Texas, so I see people in Pennsylvania remotely, obviously, and you know, people have, and for a long time, you know, Bakken doing this basically by himself. You know, people would fly into Chicago and see him from all over the place, and you know, I've had people come here to the DFW from Arizona and Kansas and places like that. You know, and we'll do that over a weekend. We don't try to do both sessions on the same day. We try to do them, you know, maybe back to back. And it's best done, you know, within maybe a week of both sessions. Sometimes if it goes too long, we have to kind of plow the same ground over again to get to the place we want to go.
So amazing. I've never heard of this, and I've been in since even before Jeff passed, let's say the metaphysical world, you know, after death or near death experiences, all these type of things. So I really appreciate all the information on this. It's amazing. I'm going to look into it for sure. And I want to ask you, because of what you experience with these people, the stories must be fascinating that they tell you,
Oh,
that
yeah.
the connections they have. And
Yeah, yeah.
so how about sharing one that comes to mind for you, that an experience that you witnessed?
Well, another one that I actually have uh, recorded, we did up at the University of North Texas in one of their graduate counseling offices that was wired for sound and video and stuff like that. And it was a fellow who had an older sister. I think he was 8 years younger than her. He's in college, and my sister is now pregnant, and everybody's really excited about that. And at the 6th month mark of her pregnancy, she has a brain aneurysm, and she is in surgery. And at some point, they said, "That's all the surgery we can do. We can't repair this totally. She's not going to make it, but we have to keep her alive until this baby is viable so that we can take it." And we go through that story. And one thing I remember him saying was the scene that was most distressing to him was being in her hospital room and seeing all these tubes running out of her, and being, on artificial life support. And he just said that was the most beautiful horror I've ever seen. And that's the place that, really stuck out to him. And I don't remember exactly what level we got to. It had come down quite significantly, but I don't even think it was at a 2 or a 3. And I asked him after a set, I said, "Okay, what's there now? What are you noticing?" And he suddenly says, "She got up." And I said, what do you mean?" And I said, "I saw her get up out of the bed and stand beside it." And I said, later on, I said, what do you think that means?" And he said, "She was showing me that wasn't the end of the story. That wasn't where it ended." And I said, "Oh. And it reminded me, of everybody's probably seen the Disney version of Pinocchio, and but actually read the book, the original book, which was written in the 1890s by a guy named Carlos Carlotti. And in the story, there's a chapter where Pinocchio is swallowed by the giant shark, not a whale, but it's a giant shark. And I thought, I remember reading that, and I thought, hey, if I was reading this as a bedtime story to my kid, and if I got to the part where, and Pinocchio was swallowed by the giant shark. Okay, that's all for tonight, kids. Sleep well.
Yeah, right.
Oh, whoa, wait a minute. That's not very helpful. But I remember the camera was running after I got up and left the session, because I had to go to the bathroom real bad, and he just sat there, and you could see him just processing this and making adjustments. And later on, he said in an email, he said, "I feel cleansed. I feel, something has left." And it has. The energy that you're holding on to that pain with is no longer there. Um, the um, and for some people, that's kind of a fight to begin with, because they have this sensation that this pain that I feel for this person and their passing is my last visceral connection with them. And if I let go of that, then they'll be totally absent. Um, and, what we try to, convince them of is you can have their memory without the pain. You can have the connection with them without that pain. And that's a whole different ballgame. The thing that, Tom, that has changed the most since I started working with grief is that somewhere early 90s, I think, people doing this work finally figured out that Sigmund Freud didn't know what the fuck he was talking about. And when he said that, actual grief recovery means that you have to deconnect from your loved one. You have to not think about them. You have to let them go. You have to, turn them into the picture on the wall or the name on the trust fund or something. What people like Teresa Rondo wrote about, became huge, which is there's not stages of grief, there's tasks of grieving. And that's universal. It's not idiosyncratic. The tasks are, I have to notice the loss. I have to cement the loss into my nervous system. I have to feel what I'm feeling about them. I can't keep censoring that. And I have to express the loss, get it out of my mouth, basically. Those are tasks. They're not optional. But the fourth task that she identified was, I have to find a way to take my loved one with me. I have to continue the relationship in some form of fashion. Now you have a visceral connection with your son in the work you're doing, and that's Mothers Against Driving was formed on a similar basis. Yep. I'm connected in a day-to-day way with something that is vitally connected with the person I lost. I'm acting out this connection. And here's, IADC is another way. I can do it, as an on, I have a friend, also a therapist, but he lost his dad to skin cancer, I believe. And his dad was this old Texas farm boy. And very laconic, he'd never say 3 words if 2 would do. I got to meet him a few times, and his dad passed away. And Paul told me he was sitting at a stoplight one day, and about a month after his dad died, and he just said out loud, he said, "Dad, this really sucks. I really miss you." And at that moment, he heard in his head his father say, "Well, son, if you miss me, I'm right here. If you miss the past, you better work on that." And I thought, that's the most succinct and accurate description of grieving I've ever heard from this old Texas farm boy. If you miss me, I'm right here. Notice it. Work with it. And, if you miss the past, I'm not there anymore. I'm here with you. We all miss the past. And
sure.
And
you miss the future that past was supposed to project, right? And so, we only got a couple minutes. I want to ask you, now with like near-death experiencers, they have lasting effects that are almost universal. of, like I said, I don't fear death. I didn't have a near-death experience, but through my understanding of things now, I don't fear death. I don't fear life, the things that can happen in life. I think we live on our existence is on another plane. So um, are there those kind of lasting things that your clients experience, like changes in them and their beliefs or things like that occur for them?
Yeah, they do, but it's like near-death experiences. For some people, the experience is dependent on how do I act this out? How do I change my cognitive and behavioral life to adjust to that experience? And I've met some NDEers who are just as narcissistic and, self-involved as anybody else, because
Mhm.
they had that to begin with, and the experience doesn't instantaneously change them. In fact, I've written a book about that. How do other people get this who may not have that experience? Well, you go through the cognitive behavioral changes that you are supposed to accompany it. But I think, I've had more than a few people tell me that, yeah, it has changed their expectations of life and their expectations of, uh, you know, basically who they could be and who they might become
Wow.
based on what their experience with their loved one has been.
Wow, that's powerful. Yeah.
Um,
So
yeah,
you gave me the, oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, that's all right.
Hmm. You gave me the site for inducedadc.com for people to
Mhm.
find out places to have this. Is there any other contacts with you or things that you're doing or some of the
Well,
things
right
you
now
mentioned, like, yeah.
I'm in the process of redeveloping my a website for me personally. My wife and I used to have one together. She's had to step back from uh, doing her work due to some health issues. So I'm redoing mine. So I don't have a full website right now, but I do have my uh, email, which is Zephat, ZEPHAT at swbell.net. And
Okay. I'll make sure that's in
so
the show notes for people if they want to
okay,
contact you. But yes, let's stay in touch. You get that website back up, those kind of things. I'll make sure it gets in the information of this
thank you,
podcast
Tom.
for sure. And I'd like to keep up on what's happening. And I'm going to look into this possibly for myself. And I think it's
Yeah.
very
Uh,
intriguing for my
have you
standpoint.
seen the documentary Life with Ghosts?
No, no.
Okay. It's a really nicely done documentary. It tells the story of one particular widow, and she took part in the university-sponsored study of IADC compared to traditional supported grief therapy that was done between 2017 and 2019. And I worked with her on camera for part of that study. And her parting words were, "Hey, it's a happy thing not to be sad." Which I thought, yeah, that's pretty true, But when you experience it, it's revelation, But you can see that. Actually, you can see like a 15-minute trailer of it online. You go to www. livingwithghostsmovie.com. And I think you can rent the whole 90-minute version of that for like $15 for 2 days, something like that. But the study that was done has been published in the Australian Journal of Grief and Bereavement. And I think the name of the journal is called Grief Matters. And it's right now awaiting peer review, but we've had 2 other studies of IADC, one in Italy and one at the University of Adelaide in Australia. So we're gaining some objective information about the procedure, which, like I said, I haven't been tempted to do anything else for people in grief for the last 20 years. It's just that effective.
Wow, that's fantastic. Beautiful. Thank you, Graham. Appreciate it. Graham Maxey is the name. And as mentioned, all the information that was mentioned in here will be in the show notes for you to find. So please find those things there. Graham, thank you for your time very much and for the amazing stories. And I'm so happy that you experienced what you did to help you with your grief and your process. So that's amazing in itself. And that's what we hope for anyone who we share these things with. So thank you so much.
Yeah, it's been life-changing for me, and the fact that now I get to multiply the effects that I've had from it by training other therapists in how to do that, and kind of spreading the ability that this has to kind of take care of one of the biggest epidemics that we have in our world, which is everybody is subject to that kind of loss. And so it's been a really nice trip for me so far.
Wonderful. Well, keep up your amazing, great work, and thank you for letting us know about this and yourself. We appreciate it very much.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Tom. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening to the Heroes in Grief podcast. If you'd like access to any of the links that we discussed in today's show, you can find them in the show notes. There's also a link there to support the podcast if you care to. And there is an email link for me there. I'd love to hear from you and your ideas about the show or what you thought about the show. You really can help out this podcast to get to more people if you subscribe, rate, or review it in whichever way your platform provides. Each week, Heroes in Grief is released on Sunday, so look for new episodes there. Thank you again for listening to Heroes in Grief.